I'm delighted to say Dan Hodges is here from the Mail on Sunday. Dan, welcome back.
Good to see you.
To the Independent Republic of Mike Graham. We've not seen you for a while, and in that period, I mean, all I can say to you is it's all kind of crumbled, hasn't
Quite
it?
Literally.
Like bad concrete. We've got Rishi Sunak sort of promising to do things, not being able to do them, reneging on things he said he was going to do. We've got Suella Braverman talking about banning dogs. We've got all sorts of banning calls to ban other things. Next it will be, let's put on some, I don't know, teaching assistants onto every school to make sure that even though they haven't got enough teachers, they'll have more teaching assistants. It's just all gone horribly wrong, isn't it?
It has, and it feels a bit like, for those of us that are old enough to remember, it feels like we're being transported back in time to the sort of fag end of the John Major administration. I mean, that's what I was writing about this weekend. I mean, I remember back then when there was a hotel fell into the sea and the Grand National didn't start, and John Smith did a very good speech in the House of Commons in which he kind of pinned it on the government. I mean, a bit unfairly, because it wasn't obviously neither of those things were John Major's fault.
But it
just fed into a mood that the government was out of control and it was out of time, and that's coming. I mean, so we've got. Obviously, they've got the concrete things. We had the prison escape. We've got, like, Chinese spies running amok around the House of Commons. And, obviously, we've got dangerous dogs. And, I mean, it's like I was saying off air, I mean, all we need now is a Cones hotline.
Yes.
And we've got the full set, basically.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, because there are those stories that just keep reverberating around, don't they? And unfortunately for Rishi Sunak, or you might say he's brought it upon himself, everything that goes wrong now is his fault.
Yeah, I think this is one of the things. I mean, the biggest problem facing the government actually is just time. This is a government that's been in 13 years. And what you see is, obviously, when a government first comes in, and the Conservatives were very effective at doing this, you have a period when you can blame it on the other lot and just say, well, look, we inherited this mess, we're just trying to clean it up. But then you cross over into a point where people just don't want to hear excuses anymore. I mean, we saw, Gillian Keegan with the concrete thing. I mean, I thought she very fairly pointed out this is a problem that goes back to the sort of mid to late 1990s. But people don't want to hear that anymore. They're tired of excuses from Rishi Sunak and his ministers for why things are going wrong. They just want them to get things right, and at the moment they're not getting things right.
But also they come out with statements like, we are now going to order the police to investigate every lead that they get. And clearly nobody in their right mind thinks that that's what the police can do, even if they wanted to do it. They can't investigate every lead. I mean, yes, it would be nice if they solved one or two crimes while they're actually at the business of law enforcement, but to make these sort of blanket statements as if they're going to happen, people are fed up with it.
Well, they are, and I think also I think it's a particular problem for Rishi Sunak, and the reason it's a particular problem for him is he's built his entire brand on being not a sort of a great sort of Churchillian national leader, but a great sort of project manager, prime minister. He's the guy who's he's going to look at the spreadsheets, and he's going to get across the budgets, and he's going to get across everything, and everything's going to be calm, and it's going to be competent.
He's like the CEO that makes the presentation. Sorry, he's like the sort of management consultant that makes the presentations to the CEO. He's not the CEO, is he?
Well, I think that's what people are starting to find out about him. I mean, and if he is the CEO, he's not a CEO who, for whatever reason, is able to get to grips with the business he's running. And like I said, somebody like Boris, you can see these things. Boris would have had a way of kind of just laughing them off or brushing them aside or successfully blaming them on someone else. It's sticking to Rishi Sunak now. And as you say, once you get like the sort of, you get the black spot on you, once a narrative is created, things are going wrong. It's very, very difficult then to turn it round.
Yes, but for Keir Starmer, things haven't really moved. I mean, since you and I last spoke, and it's probably a few months ago, yes, he's still ahead in the polls. Yes, he's still the leader of the Labour Party. But he hasn't become, for me anyway, any more impressive, I don't think. Have you seen a change in him?
I mean, I've certainly. I mean, I wrote about this. I actually saw him. He was on the House of Commons terrace last week, and he'd actually had quite a bad PMQs. He had a bit of an open goal.
He wasn't brilliant.
He wasn't at his best. He wasn't at his best. But there was something different about him. You could see it, his body language, his whole demeanour. He was there. He was relaxed. He had a sort of early evening. He had a beer. He was sort of glad-handing some of his MPs. And I've seen it. I've seen it with people before. I saw it with Blair. Saw it a bit with Cameron. He's crossed over now. He's crossed over from, rightly or wrongly, mentally he's made the transition from being leader of the opposition to Prime Minister in waiting, and that's quite a significant moment, and because it feeds into this concept of the narrative. You know, there's an aura of power around him, and people start feeding into that, and that becomes a sort of a positive, self-fulfilling prophecy. So you're right, nothing's changed, but he doesn't really want anything to change, and he doesn't need anything to change because he's so far ahead at the moment. I mean, I actually thought there was a moment after the by-elections where obviously the Tories got absolutely spanked massively in two of them and just clung on in Uxbridge for the reasons we all understand, where there was a bit of bouncing around, and he seemed a bit unnerved by that. But as we come back from recess, he seems to have calmed things down now, and his view is just steady as she goes, all things being equal, I'm going to be Prime Minister, and I think he's right.
Yeah, I mean, I hear other sort of commentators saying strange things like, well, of course, Rishi Sunak doesn't want to do anything leading up to the election period because it might rock the boat. And you're kind of going, well, surely the point is to do something.
Well, he's got to do something, isn't he? I mean,
Trevor Kavanagh wrote about this the other day. You know, he's reached this point now where it's like the wheels are spinning, or they're stuck in the sand, or whatever analogy you want to use, but there's no kind of actual policy being made. There's no improvements being made that anybody can say, well, he's done that. I mean, I can't think of one thing that Rishi Sunak has done that has been good since he's been Prime Minister.
No, I mean, the one thing I would say for him is there are just some signs. I mean, we've got some more figures today as well, with wage increases are now finally starting to outpace inflation. There are just a couple of signs that the economy is starting to just move into a slightly better place. But I think the problem for Rishi Sunak and the government is I think that change is coming too late, because again, you saw this happen. We saw this happen in the run up to 97. You know, Ken Clarke and Major did actually manage to turn the economy around. By the time we got to the election, the economy was on quite a solid footing, and people said, "Oh, you put a bit more money in our pockets. Thanks very much. We're going to pocket it." Right. But we remembered the hard times, and we're showing you the door.
And we're also just a bit tired of all of the nonsense.
Tired of it, but also there is the danger for Rishi Sunak is if people do feel a bit more economically comfortable, if they do feel a bit more economically secure, then they can sometimes think, well, do you know what? I can take a little bit of a risk on the other guy. And certainly what you are seeing is there's a mood, certainly across the country, which is whatever doubts and fears people have about Keir Starmer and Labour, and let's be honest, there's not a huge enthusiasm for Keir Starmer, but there's not a great deal of fear about him either. And there is a mood that says, look, this lot can't really do any worse.